The reflection in the polished chrome of the elevator doors was a portrait of success. Julian Vance, his tailored suit a dark slash of power, stood with his arm around Kinsley Thorne, her crimson dress a bold statement against the opulent gold-leaf lobby of Chicago's Argent Tower Hotel. They were celebrating a multi-million-dollar acquisition, a victory that tasted like vintage champagne and limitless possibility. As the door slid open, Julian's triumphant smile froze. There, on her hands and knees, was his wife. His pregnant wife, Ilara, her belly a gentle curve beneath a drab grey uniform, scrubbing the marble floor with a worn-out sponge. The universe, in that instant, tilted on its axis. The air in the lobby was thick with the cloying scent of lilies and lemon polish, a fragrance Julian usually associated with untouchable luxury. Now, it smelled of humiliation. He stood paralyzed, his mind refusing to connect the woman in the janitor's uniform with the woman who slept in his bed, the woman carrying his child. Kinsley's grip on his arm tightened. "Julian? What is it?" she whispered, her voice a silky thread of confusion. She followed his gaze. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose, a flicker of something unreadable. Was it pity or triumph in her sharp, intelligent eyes? "Is that—" Ilara hadn't seen them yet. Her focus was absolute, her movements methodical and weary. Her dark hair, usually a soft cascade over her shoulders, was pulled back in a severe, functional bun. A few stray strands clung to her temples, damp with perspiration. She pushed herself up with a sigh, her hand instinctively going to the small of her back, a gesture of maternal exhaustion Julian had seen 100 times in the comfort of their Lincoln Park brownstone. But seeing it here, on this cold, unforgiving floor, felt like a physical blow. This was impossible. Ilara, his Ilara, came from a family with modest means. Yes, but she was a graduate of Northwestern, a former art curator at a small but respected gallery, before they'd decided she should stop working to prepare for the baby. They didn't need the money. His tech company, Vance Innovations, had cleared over $50 million in the last fiscal year alone. They had a financial planner. They had investments. They had everything. What in God's name is she doing? Julian's voice was a low, dangerous growl. The shock was rapidly crystallizing into a cold, hard fury. This wasn't just bizarre. It was a betrayal, a public shaming. He started forward, his expensive leather shoes silent on the marble she had just cleaned. Kinsley tried to hold him back. "Julian, don't. Not here." But he shook her off. The world had shrunk to the space between him and his wife. He saw a hotel guest sidestep Ilara's bucket, his nose wrinkled in disdain. The sight sent a fresh wave of rage through him. His wife was being looked down upon, and it was a direct reflection on him. Ilara. His voice cut through the lobby's ambient hum. She flinched, her head snapping up. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, widened in shock, then shuttered with a swiftness that stole his breath. In them, he saw not shame, but a deep, cavernous sadness, and something else. Resolve. She slowly got to her feet, her body moving with a stiffness that spoke of hours in this position. She wiped her hands on the sides of her drab trousers, a gesture so alien, so unlike the graceful woman he knew, that it made his stomach clench. "Julian," she said, her voice quiet but steady. She didn't look at Kinsley, who now stood a few feet behind him, a perfectly composed statue of judgment. Ilara's focus was entirely on him. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice low and tight, conscious of the bellhops and receptionists who were now stealing glances. "What is this sick joke, Ilara?" "It's not a joke," she replied, her chin held high. There were no tears, no hysterics, just a profound, unnerving calm. "You're scrubbing floors," he hissed, the words tasting like poison. "My pregnant wife is scrubbing floors in a hotel where I am a preferred guest. Do you have any idea how this looks?" "How it makes me look," was the unspoken, selfish core of his question. "I know exactly how it looks," she said, and a flicker of defiance sparked in her eyes. "I have to get back to work." She bent down to pick up her bucket. The simple, dismissive action was like a lit match to his fuse. He grabbed her arm, his grip tighter than intended. "You're not going anywhere. We are leaving." "Now." Elara looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of stoic endurance. "You should go, Julian. You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're the one dressed like a pauper, on your knees for pocket change." Behind him, Kinsley cleared her throat. "Julian, perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private." Her voice was reasonable, the voice of the woman who helped him close deals, the woman who understood his world. In that moment, she was the sane one, and his wife, the mother of his child, was the stranger. He released Elara's arm as if it were burning him. The sight of her, pregnant, vulnerable, yet so stubbornly defiant, was tearing him apart. He felt a primal urge to protect her, and an equally powerful urge to throttle her for this inexplicable public disgrace. "Fine," he snarled, turning his back on her. He couldn't look at her for another second. He stalked toward the revolving doors, Kinsley falling into step beside him. "I'll have my driver pick you up," he threw over his shoulder, a command, not an offer. "Be outside in 5 minutes." He didn't wait for a reply. As he pushed through the glass door into the cool Chicago evening, the image of his wife, standing alone next to a yellow bucket, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant stomach, was seared into his brain. The celebration was over. The victory felt like ashes in his mouth. Something in his perfect, carefully constructed world had just broken, and he had no idea how to fix it. The ride back to Lincoln Park in Julian's black Mercedes S-Class was a tomb of silence. Kinsley sat beside him, the scent of her expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5, usually so intoxicating, now feeling invasive and synthetic. She reached over and placed a manicured hand on his thigh. "I can't believe she would do that to you," Kinsley said softly, her voice calibrated for maximum sympathy. "To us. It's pathological." Julian stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon pain. Pathological. The word hung in the air. Was it? Was Elara having some kind of breakdown? A pregnancy-induced psychosis? It seemed more plausible than the alternative, that she was doing this for a logical reason he couldn't fathom. "She wasn't like this when I met her," he muttered, more to himself than to Kinsley. He thought back to the Elara he'd fallen for. Vibrant, witty, her eyes full of passion when she talked about Renaissance art. She challenged him, debated with him, and saw the man behind the burgeoning tech empire. Where did that woman go? When had she been replaced by this silent, secretive stranger? "People change, Julian," Kinsley said, squeezing his leg. "Sometimes they can't keep up. Your worlds became too different. She probably resents your success." Her words were a soothing balm on his wounded pride. It made sense. He had soared, and perhaps Elara had felt left behind, grounded. This act of self-debasement could be a twisted cry for attention, a way to pull him back down to a level she understood. He seized on this explanation because it centered the narrative back on him, on his success, and her inability to cope with it. It was a story he could understand. He dropped Kinsley at her sleek River North apartment with a perfunctory kiss. "I need to handle this," he said, his voice flat. "Of course," she said, her expression a careful mixture of concern and understanding. "Call me if you need anything. Anything at all." As he pulled away, he felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Kinsley was everything his life was supposed to be now. Ambitious, polished, and uncomplicated. Her world was boardrooms and black tie galas, not dirty buckets and cracked linoleum. So why did her sympathy suddenly feel so hollow? The brownstone was dark and silent when he arrived. Usually, Elara would leave a light on in the foyer. The house felt cavernous, empty. He walked through the rooms they had meticulously decorated together. The abstract paintings she had chosen, the hand-woven rugs, the shelves of art history books. It was a home built on a foundation of shared taste and affection. Now it felt like a museum of a life that was no longer his. He went to the kitchen and poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid doing little to calm the tremor in his hands. He checked his phone. No calls, no texts from Elara. He had ordered her to be outside in 5 minutes. Where was she? Did she defy him? Or worse, did she not have a phone with her? The thought that his wife, pregnant with his child, might be wandering the streets of Chicago with no way to call for help sent a spike of genuine fear through his anger. He paced the length of the kitchen, his mind racing. He started noticing small details he'd been blind to for months. The running shoes by the back door were worn down at the heels, the laces frayed. In the refrigerator, behind his gourmet olives and imported cheeses, were simple containers of rice and beans. He remembered complaining a few weeks ago that she wasn't eating enough steak, that the baby needed iron. She had just smiled that vague, distant smile and said she was fine. He walked upstairs to their bedroom. Her side of the closet was sparser than he remembered. A few simple dresses, sweaters, and pairs of jeans. Where were the designer clothes he'd bought her? The cashmere wraps, the silk blouses? He opened her jewelry box. The diamond earrings he'd given her for their anniversary were there, but the simpler, everyday gold necklace from her grandmother was gone. A cold dread began to seep into his bones, displacing the anger. This wasn't a sudden act. This was a pattern. This was a life being quietly dismantled, piece by piece, right under his nose. He had been so consumed with his work, with the thrill of the deal and the ego-stroking attention from Kinsley, that he hadn't noticed his own wife was fading away. Meanwhile, Elara was not wandering the streets. After Julian had stormed out of the hotel, she stood for a long moment, the lobby's chaos fading into a dull roar in her ears. Her supervisor, a tired-looking woman named Maria, hurried over. "Elara, what was that? You know Mr. Vance?" Maria asked, her eyes wide. "He's my husband," Elara said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. Maria's jaw dropped. "Your husband? The Julian Vance? And I need the rest of my shift, Maria," Elara said, her voice pleading. "Please, I'm so close." Maria looked from Elara's determined face to the empty spot where the billionaire had stood. She sighed, a deep, world-weary sound. "Go. Get your things. I'll clock you out for the full shift. Just go. You don't need this kind of trouble." Elara felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost brought her to tears. "Thank you." She didn't take Julian's car. She didn't go home. She slipped out a service exit and walked 2 blocks to the L train station. The rattling journey west was a welcome anonymity. She leaned her head against the cool glass, watching the glittering skyscrapers of the Loop give way to the brick 3 flats and weathered storefronts of the city's working-class neighborhoods. She got off in a neighborhood that felt a world away from Lincoln Park. Here, the air smelled of grilled onions and diesel exhaust. She walked to a small, tidy brick apartment building and let herself in with a key. The apartment was small, but clean. The furniture was worn, but lovingly maintained. In the living room, a young man was asleep on the couch, his face etched with exhaustion. This was her brother, Leo. She moved quietly past him into a small bedroom. A nightlight cast a soft glow on a child's bed. In it, a little girl of about 6 was sleeping. Her face was pale, and a wisp of blonde hair was stuck to her forehead. A small portable oxygen tank stood beside the bed, its soft hiss the only sound in the room. This was Maya, her niece. Elara bent down and gently brushed the hair from Maya's face. The little girl stirred, her eyelids fluttering. "Auntie E?" she whispered, her voice groggy. "I'm here, sweet pea," Elara said, her voice breaking for the first time that night. "I'm here. Go back to sleep." She sat in a rocking chair in the corner of the room, finally letting the facade of strength crumble. The tears she'd refused to shed in front of Julian now fell freely, silently tracing paths down her cheeks. She wasn't scrubbing floors because she resented Julian's success or wanted his attention. She was doing it because Leo's small graphic design business had collapsed after he'd spent months at his daughter's bedside. She was doing it because Maya had cystic fibrosis, and the experimental treatment that was finally working wasn't fully covered by his bare-bones insurance plan. The co-pays and deductibles were a mountain of debt that was threatening to crush them. She had sold her jewelry. She had sold her designer clothes on consignment. She had started taking cleaning jobs, first in private homes, then at the hotel, because the cash was quick and untraceable. She hadn't told Julian because she knew exactly what he would say. He despised Leo, calling him a dreamer with no head for business. He had once offered to invest in Leo's company, but his terms were so predatory they were insulting. Julian didn't give handouts. He made calculated investments, and to him, her family was a bad investment. Telling him would have meant a fight, his judgment, his controlling solution. And she couldn't bear his pity, or worse, his disdain for her family's struggle. So she had chosen to bear the burden alone, to protect her brother's pride and her daughter's future in the only way she knew how. She rocked slowly in the dark, the quiet hiss of the oxygen tank a metronome for her grief. She had seen the look on Julian's face, the shock, the fury, the utter contempt. And she had seen Kinsley standing beside him, a perfect replacement. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she hadn't just been caught. She had been erased. The next morning, Julian woke up on the couch, a crick in his neck and the taste of stale whiskey in his mouth. The house was still silent. Elara had not come home. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of his hangover. He grabbed his phone and dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. He called again, and again. The same robotic voice greeted him each time. He showered and dressed with mechanical efficiency, his mind a whirlwind of scenarios. Had she left him? Was she with a friend? Or was she with her brother, Leo? The thought landed with the force of a punch. Of course, her perpetually struggling artist brother, Leo. Julian had always seen him as a financial black hole, a man who confused passion with a business plan. Elara's fierce loyalty to him had been a constant point of friction in their marriage. Driven by a new, focused anger, Julian logged into their joint bank account. He was a man who believed in data, in concrete facts. The numbers would tell him the story. He scrolled through months of statements. There were no massive, suspicious withdrawals, Nothing that would suggest she was funding a secret life. Just their usual expenses, and her weekly allowance, a sum he now realized was insultingly small, which he always withdrew in cash. He then noticed something else. Small, regular payments to online consignment stores. Poshmark. The real. He cross-referenced the dates. They corresponded with the times he'd casually complimented her on a new dress, only for her to shrug it off. She hadn't been buying new clothes. She had been selling the ones he'd bought for her. The discovery didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a clue to a puzzle he was too arrogant to see. Why would she need to sell her things? Why the secrecy? He decided to go to the source, not Leo's. Not yet. That would be a declaration of war. He went back to the Argent Tower Hotel. He strode into the lobby like he owned the place, which, in a way, he felt he did. He demanded to see the hotel manager. A nervous, well-dressed man named Mr. Davies appeared from a back office, his face a mask of professional courtesy. "Mr. Vance, to what do we owe the pleasure?" Mr. Davies asked, clearly aware of who Julian was. "I have a sensitive question," Julian said, his voice low and firm. "One of your cleaning staff. Her name is Ilara. I need to know her employment details." Mr. Davies paled. "Sir, I'm not at liberty to discuss our employees' information." Julian leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Mr. Davies, my company holds its annual tech summit here every year. That's a 7-figure contract. Now, I can either take that contract to the Four Seasons, or you can tell me what I need to know about Ilara. Your choice." The threat, crude and effective, hung in the air. Mr. Davies swallowed hard. "Let me see what I can find." A few minutes later, in a small, windowless office, Julian had the file. Ilara Mason, she had used her maiden name, had been working for the hotel's third-party cleaning service for 3 months. She worked 4 shifts a week, always in the evenings. Paid in cash, off the books, minimum wage. The address she had listed was in a working-class neighborhood on the west side. The address. It was the key. He plugged it into his car's GPS. As he drove away from the gleaming towers of downtown, the city's facade of wealth peeled away block by block. The manicured parks gave way to cracked pavement and chain-link fences. He found the building. It was the one from his nightmares, the one he had pictured in his mind's eye when he thought of Leo's failures. He parked his Mercedes across the street, the sleek German car looking like a spaceship on the humble street. He sat there for a long time, watching the front door. What was he going to do? Storm in? Yell at Leo? Drag Ilara out? He was a problem solver. That's what had made him a millionaire. Every issue had a solution, a strategy. But this was messy. It was human, and he was completely out of his depth. While Julian was playing detective, Kinsley was making her own moves. She wasn't a fool. She had seen the look on Julian's face in the hotel lobby. It wasn't just anger at a social embarrassment. It was the raw, jagged pain of a man whose heart had been ripped out. She realized with a chilling certainty that his affair with her was a symptom, not the disease. The core of his world was still Ilara. Kinsley was a strategist, just like Julian. She didn't get emotional. She got information. She used her own considerable network of contacts, making a few discreet calls. She didn't ask about Ilara. She asked about Leo Mason. It didn't take long. A friend in the financial sector pulled some credit reports. Another contact in the healthcare industry had access to insurance databases. Within hours, Kinsley had a clearer picture than Julian did. A collapsed business, mountains of medical debt, a daughter with a chronic, expensive illness. She sat in her pristine, minimalist apartment, a glass of chilled Sauvignon Blanc in her hand, and pieced it all together. Ilara wasn't having a breakdown. She wasn't trying to spite Julian. She was fighting a desperate, quiet war for her family. A strange mix of emotions washed over Kinsley. There was a grudging respect. It was a bold, if foolish, strategy. But there was also a cold fury. This secret, this noble, self-sacrificing secret, made Alara the tragic heroine. It made Kinsley the villain. It recast the entire drama, and she was on the losing side. She knew she had to use this information to her advantage. She could go to Julian, reveal the truth, and frame it as a testament to Alara's dishonesty and manipulation. See, Julian, she didn't trust you. She lied to you for months. She doesn't respect you enough to be your partner. It was a powerful angle. It would play on his ego, his need for control and transparency. She picked up her phone to call him. Her thumb hovered over his name. But she hesitated. For the first time, she felt a crack in her own polished armor. The image of the pregnant woman on her knees, scrubbing a floor. Not for herself, but for a sick child. It was potent. It was real. Everything in Kinsley's life felt transactional by comparison. Her relationship with Julian, her career, her friendships. This was something else entirely. Something that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. She put the phone down. For now, she would wait. She would watch Julian unravel, and then she would decide which piece of information would be the weapon, and which would be the olive branch. That evening, Julian was still parked across the street from the apartment building. He had watched Leo leave in a battered old Honda and return an hour later with a bag of groceries. There was no sign of Alara. As dusk settled, a light came on in a second-floor window. He could see silhouettes moving inside. He couldn't take it anymore. He got out of the car and walked across the street. He buzzed the apartment number he had gotten from the hotel file. A voice crackled through the intercom. "Hello?" It was Leo. "Leo, it's Julian. Open the door." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. There was a long pause. "She's not here, Julian." "I don't care. Open the door. We need to talk." Another pause, then the buzz of the lock releasing. Julian pushed the door open and walked up the narrow staircase. The building smelled of old dust and fried food. Leo was waiting at the open door of his apartment, his arms crossed. He looked tired, older than Julian remembered, but his eyes were hard. "What do you want?" Leo asked. "I want to know what the hell is going on," Julian said, stepping into the small living room. His eyes scanned the space, taking in the worn couch, the second-hand furniture, the framed photos of a smiling little girl on the wall. "Where is she?" "She went to her late shift," Leo said, his voice laced with defiance. "She's working, something you probably know a thing or two about." The jab hit its mark. Working scrubbing floors, while her husband is a millionaire. Help me understand the logic here, Leo. Leo's jaw tightened. The logic is called desperation, Julian. It's called doing whatever it takes to keep your family from drowning. But you wouldn't understand that. You don't rescue people. You acquire them. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and true. Before Julian could retort, a small voice came from the bedroom. "Daddy? Is that Uncle Julian?" Leo's hostile expression melted away instantly, replaced by one of pure tenderness. "It's okay, sweet pea. Go back to sleep." Julian's blood ran cold. Uncle Julian. The little girl knew his name. Alara had brought him into this world, at least in conversation, even while she was hiding it from him. "Her daughter?" Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper. "My daughter," Leo corrected him sharply. "Maya. And she's the reason your wife is breaking her back. She's the reason Alara sold her grandmother's necklace. She's the reason she's swallowing her pride every single night." Leo walked over to a stack of papers on a small desk and threw a folder onto the coffee table. You want logic? There's your logic. Julian opened the folder. It was a sea of medical bills, invoices from a children's hospital, statements from a pharmaceutical company, letters from the insurance provider. The numbers were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars. And highlighted at the bottom of one of the statements was a balance due. 87,450. He looked at the name of the condition listed on the documents. Cystic fibrosis. He remembered Elara mentioning her niece had breathing problems, but she had downplayed it, never letting on the severity, the crushing financial weight. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture not of betrayal, but of sacrifice. A picture so devastatingly clear it knocked the air from his lungs. The secrecy, the lies. It wasn't about her. It was never about her. It was to protect this little girl, and to protect her brother from Julian's judgment, to protect herself from his predictable, controlling reaction. He looked up at Leo, whose face was a mixture of anger and grief. "Why didn't she tell me?" Julian asked, the question raw and genuine. Leo let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Are you kidding me? Because you would have made it a transaction. You would have waved your checkbook around like a king, bought his gratitude, and held it over her head forever. You would have solved the problem without ever understanding the burden. She didn't want your money, Julian. She wanted your heart. And she knew you weren't capable of giving it." The words were a dagger, twisting in his gut. Because he knew, in that gut-wrenching moment of clarity, that Leo was right. That is exactly what he would have done. He sank onto the arm of the worn-out couch. The medical bills spread before him like an indictment. His rage was gone, replaced by a shame so profound it felt like he was suffocating. He had stood in that opulent hotel lobby, dripping with wealth and arrogance, and had accused the woman carrying his child of humiliating him. The truth was, he had humiliated himself. The revelation in Leo's apartment left Julian adrift in a sea of self-loathing. He drove aimlessly through the city for hours, the medical bills a lead weight on the passenger seat. Leo's words echoed in his head. "She didn't want your money, Julian. She wanted your heart." He had always prided himself on his intelligence, his ability to see angles and patterns others missed. But he had been blind to the most important pattern of all, the slow erosion of his own marriage, the quiet desperation of his wife. He had measured his life in stock prices and acquisitions, while Elara had been measuring hers in doses of medicine and looming debt. He thought of the power imbalance he had fostered. He handled the big picture, the finances, the investments, the future. He had relegated her to the small things, the home, the social calendar, their life. He saw now that her small things contained a universe of quiet strength and sacrifice he had never bothered to look at. Her secret wasn't a betrayal of him. It was a testament to his failure to be a true partner. He couldn't go home to the empty house. He couldn't face Kinsley, who represented the shallow, transactional world he now found repulsive. There was only one place to go. He looked at the letterhead on one of the bills. The Anne and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago, a world-class facility just a few blocks from the luxury condos and high-end boutiques where he and Kinsley had celebrated their victory. He parked in the hospital's massive garage, the antiseptic smell a stark contrast to the hotel lobby's perfumed air. He walked into the main entrance, a place buzzing with a quiet, controlled urgency. Here, wealth and status were irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the fragile life in the balance. Parents with hollowed-out eyes clutched coffee cups. Doctors spoke in hushed, serious tones, and the air hummed with the beeping of unseen machines. He didn't know where to go, so he just stood there. A man in a $1,000 suit, utterly lost. He saw a wing dedicated to pulmonary medicine and felt a pull. He followed the signs, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He found a small waiting area outside the specialized unit, and there, sitting in a hard plastic chair under the unflattering fluorescent lights, was Elara. She wasn't in her cleaning uniform. She had changed into a simple pair of maternity jeans and a soft, worn sweater. Her hair was down now, falling loosely around her shoulders. She looked exhausted, her face pale, but there was a serenity about her that he hadn't seen in months. In her hands was not a phone, but a children's book with a tattered cover. She was reading aloud, her voice a soft, soothing murmur. He followed her gaze to a glass-walled room. Inside, Maya was propped up on a bed, a clear mask over her face, delivering a breathing treatment. She was listening intently to her aunt's voice, her small hand resting on the glass. Julian watched, hidden behind a pillar, his chest aching. He saw the easy love between them, the profound, unspoken bond. He saw Elara pause her reading to make a funny face, and saw Maya's eyes crinkle in a smile behind the mask. This was her real life. This was the secret she was protecting. Not just the debt, but this sacred space, this bubble of love and resilience, safe from his judgment and his corporate problem-solving mindset. A doctor in blue scrubs came out of the room and spoke to Elara. Julian strained to hear. The new medication is holding her steady, which is fantastic news, the doctor said. But the long-term prognosis depends on consistency. We can't have any lapses in treatment. I understand, Elara said, her voice firm. There won't be any lapses. I'll make sure of it. Good, the doctor said with a kind smile. She's a tough kid. She gets it from her aunt, I think. The doctor walked away, and Elara leaned her head back against the wall, closing her eyes for just a moment. The weight of her promise, of her burden, was visible in the slight slump of her shoulders. Julian knew he couldn't hide any longer. He stepped out from behind the pillar. Elara's eyes snapped open, sensing his presence before she saw him. When her gaze met his, there was no surprise, no anger. Just a deep, bone-weary resignation, as if she knew this moment was inevitable. He walked over slowly and stood before her, feeling like a stranger. The bravado, the anger, the self-pity, it had all been burned away, leaving only a raw, humbling shame. Elara, he began, his voice hoarse. I went to see Leo. She simply nodded, her eyes never leaving his. She was waiting. I saw the bills, he continued, the words feeling pathetic and small. I understand. A sad, mirthless smile touched her lips. No, you don't, she said softly. You saw numbers on a page, Julian. You don't understand what it's like to watch a child you love struggle for every breath. You don't understand what it's like to watch your brother, a good, proud man, be crushed by a system that's designed for him to fail. You understand a problem that needs a financial solution. You don't understand the heart of it. Her words were not an attack. They were a statement of fact, delivered with a clarity that was more devastating than any shouted accusation. You're right, he said, the admission tearing at his pride. I don't, but I want to. God, Elara, I want to understand. He looked past her, through the glass at the little girl who was the center of this storm. His niece, his family. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, the same question he'd asked Leo, but this time it wasn't an accusation. It was a plea. Please, help me understand why you felt you had to do this alone. Elara was silent for a long time, her gaze distant. Do you remember when Leo first tried to launch his business, 5 years ago? She asked. He needed a small loan, just $5,000 to secure a lease. You had just closed your first big deal. I asked if we could help him. Julian winced, the memory flooding back with perfect, damning clarity. You laughed, she said, her voice flat. You said, I don't throw good money after bad feelings. You told me Leo needed to learn the hard way, that handouts make people weak. You lectured me for an hour on risk assessment and return on investment, as if you were talking about a failing stock, not my brother. She finally looked at him, and he saw the ancient hurt in her eyes. That was the day I learned that your help comes with a price tag and a judgment. I knew if I told you about Maya, you would see it as another one of Leo's failures. You would write a check? Yes. You would solve the problem. And then you would own it. You would own his gratitude, and you would hold it up as proof of your superiority and his weakness forever. I could not do that to him, and I could not do that to us. She took a deep breath, her hand resting on her belly. So I did what I had to do. I handled it. I sold things we didn't need. I took a job. I did it to protect Maya's life, and to protect my brother's dignity, and to protect what little was left of my love for you from your own worst instincts. Each word was a precise, surgical cut. He had no defense. She had diagnosed his character with flawless accuracy. He wasn't a partner. He was a CEO. He didn't love. He acquired. Tears welled in his eyes. Hot, shameful tears. He, Julian Vance, the master of the universe, was crying in the middle of a hospital corridor. He sank to his knees in front of her. He didn't care who saw. He reached out, not to grab her, but just to touch the sleeve of her sweater, a tentative, desperate gesture. I am so sorry, Alara, he whispered, his voice cracking. I am so sorry. You were right. You were right about everything. About me. I broke us. I was so busy building an empire, I didn't see that my own home was falling apart. I saw you on that floor, and all I could think about was my own pride. I didn't even see you. He looked up at her, his face a mess of contrition. Please, let me help. Not with a check. Not as a transaction. As a husband, as an uncle, as a father. Let me earn my way back. I know I don't deserve it, but I will spend the rest of my life trying. Alara looked down at the man kneeling before her. The arrogant titan of industry was gone, replaced by a broken man. She saw the genuine anguish in his eyes, the self-awareness that had been absent for so long. She didn't see a solution or a quick fix. She saw a glimmer of the man she had first fallen in love with, the man who had been buried under years of success and ego. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She simply placed her hand over his on her sleeve. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. And in the sterile, quiet hallway of the children's hospital, amidst the hum of life-saving machines, it was more than he could have ever hoped for. The first step was the hardest. Julian had to dismantle the life he had built on a foundation of lies. The next morning, he called Kinsley. He didn't meet her at a fancy restaurant or her sleek apartment. He asked her to meet him at a simple, anonymous coffee shop, halfway between their two worlds. She walked in, looking flawless, as always, a stark contrast to how he felt inside, fractured and raw. She slid into the booth opposite him, her expression carefully neutral. "Julian," she said, "you look terrible." "I feel terrible," he admitted. "Kinsley, I need to—" "Let me guess," she interrupted, her voice cool and sharp. "You're going back to her. The noble, suffering wife. It's quite the story. Very dramatic." He was taken aback. "How do you know?" Kinsley laughed, a dry, cynical sound. Oh, please, Julian. I'm not an idiot. I'm a strategist, remember? Just like you. I knew something was wrong, so I did what you would do. I gathered intelligence. I know all about the brother, the sick kid, the medical debt. I've known for 2 days. He stared at her, stunned. And you didn't tell me? Why would I? It wasn't my secret to tell, she said, taking a sip of the coffee the waitress had placed in front of her. Besides, I wanted to see what you would do, if you'd figure it out on your own, and who you would choose when you did. She looked at him over the rim of her cup, her eyes cold. You chose her. Predictable but understandable. Her pragmatism was both terrifying and, in a strange way, a relief. There would be no tearful, dramatic scene. This was a negotiation, the end of a partnership. There was never a choice, Kinsley, he said quietly. Not really. You and I. This was an escape. It was a fantasy based on success and ambition. It wasn't real. What she was doing, what she was fighting for, that was real. I just wasn't man enough to see it. So what now? She asked, her tone businesslike. You crawl back, beg for forgiveness and play the happy family? I'm going to try to earn her forgiveness, he corrected. And it has nothing to do with playing a part. It's about becoming the man I should have been all along. Our arrangement is over. I'm sorry for the way I used you, for the dishonesty. You deserve better than that. Kinsley was silent for a moment, studying his face. She saw no indecision there. She saw a man who had been fundamentally changed. The Julian she was attracted to, the ruthless, confident, untouchable predator, was gone. This new version was introspective, wounded, and of no use to her. Don't flatter yourself, Julian, she said, standing up and placing a crisp $20 bill on the table. I wasn't a victim here. This was a merger of interests. The interests have diverged. Consider the partnership dissolved. She turned and walked out of the coffee shop without a backward glance. It was a cold, clean break, and Julian knew it was exactly what he deserved. As he watched her disappear into the flow of the city, he felt a profound sense of an entire chapter of his life closing for good. His next action was just as decisive. He went to his bank and arranged for a wire transfer. He paid off the entire $87,450 medical debt, plus an additional sum to cover future expenses. He instructed the bank to make the payment anonymously through a hospital fund. He wasn't buying gratitude. He was simply lifting the burden, as Ilara had done, but with the resources he had. It was the first time in years he had used his money for something other than growing his own wealth or status, and it felt surprisingly, deeply good. That evening he didn't go to the brownstone. He went back to Leo's apartment. This time he didn't demand. He knocked softly. Leo opened the door, his expression wary. I'm not here to fight, Julian said. I wanted to give you this. He handed Leo a simple, sealed envelope. And to say I'm sorry. For everything. For my arrogance, my judgment, for being a terrible brother-in-law. Leo looked at the envelope, then at Julian's face. He saw the exhaustion, the sincerity. He opened it. Inside was not a check, but a single sheet of paper. It was a deed of partnership for a new LLC, Mason Creative Group. Julian had used his own lawyers to draft it. It made Leo the 90% owner and managing partner. Julian was a 10% silent partner, with a single clause stating his investment was a one-time, no-strings-attached capital contribution to get the business back on its feet. Leo was speechless. He looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Julian, why? Because you're a good man and a talented designer, "And you deserve a fair chance," Julian said. "And because my wife loves you. I need to start honoring the people she loves." Before Leo could respond, Elara appeared in the doorway behind him. She had just gotten home. She saw the document in Leo's hand, saw the look on his face, and then looked at Julian. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice cautious. "I made an investment," Julian said, looking her in the eye. "In family." A few days later, Leo got a call from the hospital's billing department. His outstanding balance had been paid in full by an anonymous donor. He knew, of course, who it was. He called Elara, his voice thick with emotion. That night, Elara came home. The brownstone was quiet. Julian was in the kitchen, not drinking whiskey, but clumsily trying to follow a recipe for the simple lentil soup she liked. He had filled the fridge with the kinds of foods she actually ate. He had bought a new pair of comfortable, supportive running shoes and left them by the back door. They didn't fall into each other's arms. The damage was too deep for that. They talked. For hours. It was a painful, awkward, necessary conversation. She laid bare all the moments he had made her feel small, all the times his ambition had overshadowed their partnership. He didn't defend himself. He listened. He owned his failures. He admitted his affair with Kinsley, explaining it not as an excuse, but as a symptom of his own emptiness. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Julian," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "The trust is gone." "I know," he said, his heart breaking. "I don't expect you to. Forgiveness is something you earn, not something you ask for. All I'm asking for is a chance to start earning it. Let me stay. Let me be a father to our child. Let us go to counseling. Let me show you, day by day, that I can be the man you deserve." She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time in what felt like years. She saw the fear in his eyes, the terror of losing her, of losing everything that truly mattered. And she saw the resolve to change. "Okay, Julian," she said softly. "We can try." Trying was harder than either of them could have imagined. Redemption wasn't a single dramatic act. It was a slow, grueling process, built from 1,000 tiny, deliberate choices. They started couples therapy with a woman named Dr. Anya Sharma. The sessions were brutal. They unearthed years of resentment, of miscommunication, of Julian's casual dismissiveness, and Elara's silent retreats. Julian had to learn to listen, not to solve, but to understand. He had to learn that Elara's feelings were not problems to be managed, but realities to be honored. Elara had to learn to speak her truth, even when it was ugly and painful, instead of swallowing it down and carrying the burden alone. Julian fundamentally changed how he worked. He delegated more advanced innovations, stepping back from the day-to-day obsession. He started leaving the office at 5 p.m. He turned off his phone during dinner. He wasn't just doing it for show. He was recalibrating his entire definition of success. He realized that a multi-billion-dollar valuation meant nothing if his own home was emotionally bankrupt. He began to build a real relationship with Leo and Maya. He didn't just throw money at them. He showed up. He went to Maya's doctor's appointments with Elara, learning the complex terminology of her condition, holding her hand during breathing treatments. He spent Saturdays with Leo, not as a patron, but as a friend, helping him paint his new office, offering genuine advice, when asked, on his business plan. He saw the joy on Elara's face when she watched him playing on the floor with Maya, making the little girl giggle. He was finally seeing her family, not as a liability, but as an extension of his own. The power imbalance in their marriage shifted. It was no longer the millionaire and the dependent wife. It was two equals, navigating a treacherous path back to each other. He started asking for her opinion on his business, valuing her insight on human dynamics, something he now realized he was terrible at. She started to include him in decisions about her family, trusting that his input would come from a place of care, not control. There were setbacks. Arguments flared up. Old wounds were reopened. There were days when Ilara would look at him, and the trust just wasn't there. The shadow of his betrayal still too long. There were days when Julian's old, arrogant instincts would surface, and he would have to consciously, painfully, push them back down. Months passed. The seasons changed. Ilara's belly grew, a constant, visible reminder of the future they were trying to build. One evening, as they were assembling a crib in the nursery, Ilara paused, a small, sad smile on her face. "I still miss my grandmother's necklace," she said softly. It was the first time she had mentioned any of the things she had sold. Julian's heart clenched. He had thought about trying to buy it back, but he knew that wasn't the point. "I know," he said. "I'm so sorry you had to part with it." "It's okay," she said, looking at him. "I sold it to help my family. I don't regret the choice. I just regret the circumstances that made it necessary." In that moment, he understood. The goal wasn't to erase the past, but to build a future where such desperate circumstances could never happen again. Not because of his money, but because of their partnership. The day their son was born was a turning point. Holding the tiny, perfect infant in his arms, Julian felt a wave of love so fierce and protective it dwarfed any ambition he had ever felt. He looked over at Ilara, exhausted but radiant, and saw his whole world there in that hospital room. Not the empire he had built, but the family he had almost lost. "He looks like you," Ilara whispered, her eyes shining. "He has your strength," Julian replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I hope he has your heart." Their journey was far from over. Trust, once shattered, is a mosaic, painstakingly pieced back together, the cracks always a part of its history. But now, the pieces were being held together by honesty, effort, and a hard-won, profound love. He was no longer the millionaire who saw his wife cleaning floors. He was simply a husband and a father who had been given the rarest of gifts, a second chance to get it right. This story is a powerful reminder that the foundations of a relationship are not built on wealth or success, but on trust, empathy, and the courage to see each other's hidden battles. Julian's journey from arrogance to humility shows that it's never too late to change, to dismantle a life built on ego and rebuild one based on love. Ilara's quiet strength teaches us that the most powerful acts often go unseen, driven by a love that asks for nothing in return. Their story isn't just about betrayal and forgiveness. It's about the long, difficult, but ultimately beautiful work of two people choosing to find their way back to each other. What did you think of Julian's transformation? Do you believe a relationship can truly recover from such a deep betrayal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life dramas that explore the complexities of the human heart.